On the day I was supposed to feel most loved, my parents looked me in the eye and said they were too ashamed to walk me down the aisle. In that moment, I realized I wasn't losing a family. I was gaining the strength to stand alone. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Veil of Vengeance for more powerful stories of betrayal, revenge, and redemption. I stood behind the church doors, gripping the edge of my jacket, waiting for the signal to walk down the aisle. My parents were supposed to be there. They were supposed to walk me down like every other proud father and mother would. But instead, my father looked me in the eye that morning and said, "We won't embarrass our family name walking beside a mechanic." My mother just stood there silent, watching me the way someone watches a stranger. My chest felt hollow, but I nodded. I told them I understood, even though I didn't. I didn't understand how the people who raised me, who once bragged about my school grades, my first job, my first scholarship, now couldn't stand the idea of being seen next to me because I fix engines for a living that I took a breath. I was ready to walk myself down the aisle alone. But just as the music started, just as the doors were about to open, someone stepped forward beside me. It was the mayor. He looked at me with a calm smile and said, "Evan, if your parents won't walk with you, I will. Let's show them who you really are." And as we stepped forward into the light, into a sea of people and stunned silence, he turned toward my parents sitting in the back row and said, "Let me introduce you to the man who designed our city's new airport." My name is Evan Warwick. I'm 29 years old. I work as an aircraft mechanic, and I've spent most of my life trying to prove I was worth something to the people who were supposed to believe in me the most, my parents. I grew up in a household where titles mattered more than happiness. My dad, Harold Warwick, was a former banker who believed success was measured in briefcases and neckties. He wore his pride like a suit and handed out shame like a business card. My mom, Clara, was softer in tone, but she followed my dad's lead in everything. She was the kind of woman who ironed his shirts before ironing out her own opinions. They raised me to be polished. Not honest, not fulfilled, just polished. From the outside, our family looked perfect. Private school, piano lessons, family portraits, and matching outfits. Inside, it was a long list of expectations with no room for questions. By the time I was a teenager, I had a real ready-learn-torkers. That disappointment wasn't something you shared in my family. It was something you became. But I wasn't a bad kid. I just loved machines. I'd spend hours in the garage fixing anything I could get my hands on. Lawnmowers, radios, my friends' dirt bikes. That I wasn't interested in numbers on a spreadsheet or corporate hierarchies. Tool engines, Andes, and Are you systems that made things move? I was obsessed with the idea that something broken could be made whole again if you just took the time to understand how it worked. That didn't sit well with my dad. When I told him at 19 that I wanted to drop out of business school to go to aviation tech school, he didn't say a word at first. He just stared at me. Then he stood up from the dinner table and said, "You crawl under airplanes chatting, AG, and like some glorified janitor? Don't expect me to pay for it." I paid for it myself. I picked up a job detailing cars during the day and took classes at night. I moved out. My parents stopped calling. Birthdays passed quietly. I sent texts. My mom replied sometimes. My dad never did that. I heard through my sister Lila. They told family friends I was working in logistics. It was easier, I guess, than saying their only son was a mechanic. But I was good at it. Within a few years, I had certifications in systems diagnostics and aeronautics repair. I got hired by one of the biggest regional aviation firms in the state. I wasn't just turning wrenches. I was helping redesign mechanical safety protocols for municipal aircraft and later systems that ended up becoming part of our city's airport redesign. That's where I met Nora. She worked in urban development, one of the consultants overseeing the accreation.ivian. She was creative, and the first person I'd ever met who didn't just tolerate my passion. She celebrated it. No apologies. I didn't apologize for loving what I did. Being around her felt like breathing for the first time in years. We dated for almost 3 years before I proposed. She said yes through tears. I think we both knew that wedding wasn't just going to be the start of a marriage. For me, it was the chance to finally stand in front of everyone and say, "This is who I am, and I'm not ashamed." So, when we started planning the wedding, Nora gently asked if I wanted to invite my parents. I hesitated, then nodded. I didn't know what I expected, but I hoped for just a second that maybe they'd show up, that maybe they'd realize the life I realize it was worth being proud of, even if it didn't match the blueprint they'd drawn up in their heads. That I sent them the invitation by hand. A week later, I received RSVP envelope and the live mail. Inside was T will attend, with a checked Ekmarkin will attend, but no note, no call, nothing personal. It felt cold, but I took it as a start. At least they were coming. I end the days leading up to the wedding. I stayed busy. Fittings, rehearsals, double-checking the venue. Nora was glowing with excitement. Her family was buzzing with joy. Her dad pulled me aside and said, "You're already like a son to us. You know that, right?" I smiled and thanked him, but deep down, I still held on to the idea that maybe my dad would show up early, maybe shake my hand, maybe say he was proud. I didn't need a grand apology, just something, anything. Then came the morning of the wedding. I met them outside the venue just before the ceremony. My father barely looked at me. My mother gave me a small nod. Then he said it. "We won't walk you down the aisle. We're not going to stand there and pretend we support this career choice. You made your bed. Walk it yourself." I stared at him, unsure if I should speak or just let the silence hold everything I couldn't say. My mother added quietly, "We're here, but please don't make a scene." I nodded. Then I turned around and walked back inside. I wasn't sure if I felt numb or if I was just finally done, hoping they'd change. I looked at myself in the mirror, adjusted my tie, and whispered to no one in particular, "I deserve to be here." I walked back into the venue with a face that felt like it didn't belong to me. Everything looked perfect. The pews were lined with white roses and green ivy the way where Nora wanted. Her whirly was seated near the front, some chatting and dadding, adjusting their clothes. The wedding planner gave me a cheerful thumbs up. No one could tell my stomach had dropped 10 floors that I slipped into a side room and closed the door. For a second, I just stood there staring at the wall. My tie felt too tight. My hands were cold. It wasn't about walking alone. I could handle that. I'd done harder things. It was about what it meant. My parents weren't just sitting out a tradition. They were sitting out the most important day of my life. And they were doing it to prove a point. That I pulled out my phone. I opened the last message I had ever received from my father. It was 2 years old, just one sentence. "You made your choice." A knock came at the door. It was Nora. She slipped in quietly and closed it behind her, took tone, 1 LME, K at me, and her smile faded. "What happened?" she asked. I hesitated. I didn't want to ruin the day for her, but I couldn't lie. "They're here," I said, "but they won't walk me down the aisle." Her eyes softened. "Why?" I sat down on the small bench by the window. "Because I'm a mechanic. Because I chose the life I wanted instead of the life they planned. He said he won't stand beside a son who embarrasses the family name." She didn't say anything at first. She just came and sat next to me, taking my hand in hers. "We can delay this," she whispered. "We can push it. We don't have to do it today." I shook my head. "No, I'm not giving them that much power. This is our day. I want to marry you. Nothing else matters." Nora looked at me saying, "Are you proud?" "Ayud. You sure?" I nodded. "I've walked through tougher places alone. I'll walk this aisle alone too, if I have to." She leaned in and kissed my forehead. Then she left so I could get ready. I sat there for another minute, trying to collect myself. I took a breath. I stood up. I checked my tie again, brushed a few wrinkles from my jacket, and looked in the mirror that I didn't see a failure. I saw a man who had worked for everything he had. I saw someone who had every right to feel proud, but I also saw the empty space on either side of me. The 2 people who were supposed to be there, the ones who should have said, "We're proud of you." I opened the door and stepped into the hallway that led to the main entrance. The wedding planner and "Are you mind?" You into you. You ready? Almost, I said. Can you do one thing for me? Of course. When you open the doors, don't say anything about who's walking me down. Just open them and let me walk. But gave a curious look, but nodded. You got it. Guests were already rising from their seats as the music began. I could hear the swell of strings. I could feel the energy shift in the room, the beginning of something sacred. I stood just behind the doors, heart steady, eyes forward. Then I heard a voice behind me. Wait. I turned. There, standing in a dark blue suit and holding out his arm like this was always the plan, was Mayor Calvin Holt. I blinked, stunned. Mayor. He smiled at me, warm and confident. Evan, if your parents won't walk you honored on a dead nord too. I couldn't find words. How did you even? He waved the question away. Word travels fast, and besides, I owe you. That safety override you designed for the control tower last fall. It saved us hundreds of thousands of dollars, and probably a few lives. We haven't forgotten. I hesitated. This isn't your job. He looked me dead in the eye. No, but it's the right thing to do, and sometimes that matters more. I looked at his outstretched arm. I thought about my dad sitting in the back row. I thought about every day I spent wondering if I'd ever be good enough. I took the mayor's arm. Ready when you are, he said. The wedding planner opened the doors. The music swelled. Gasps echoed across the room. A few heads turned, some in confusion, others in recognition. I held my head high. Every step I took down that aisle felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd been taught to hide, and I hadn't even reached the best part yet, because the moment we reached the middle of the aisle, Mayor Holt turned toward my parents in the back row, raised his voice just enough, and said, "Let me introduce you to the man who designed our city's new airport." The room was frozen. Mayor Holt's voice echoed across the chapel like a quiet thunderclap. Everyone turned toward the back row where my parents sat stiffly. My father's face didn't move, but I saw his jaw tighten. My mother looked away, pretending to adjust the bracelet on her wrist. I didn't look back at them again. I kept walking, hands still linked with the mayor's arm, step by step toward the altar. Nora was standing there, her eyes locked on mine. She didn't blink. Her expression said everything: pride, love, relief. The mayor leaned in slightly as we approached the front and said under his breath, "That was the easiest introduction I've ever had the pleasure of giving." I let out a breath, nodded, and stepped forward toward my future. The ceremony moved on. The officiant began speaking, but my head was still spinning. I could feel my parents' presence behind me. I knew they were there, but they felt farther away than ever. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I just felt reluctance across the glanced across. Ross the Crow friends, and the colleagues, and the friends, and a few from the airport engineering team. A few gave me subtle nods of recognition. Some smiled, clearly surprised by what they just heard. One of them mouthed, "That was badass." I smiled back, but as I stood there holding Nora's hands and preparing to say my vows, I felt the moment shift inside me. Not because of who wasn't standing beside me, but because of I had spent years trying to make myself small to keep them happy. I apologized my career, and achievements, and quiet at dinners when someone made a joke about blue-collar work. I had hoped that if I stayed quiet long enough, my parents would eventually come around. But walking down that aisle with the mayor of our city beside me, everything finally clicked. I didn't need to earn their pride anymore. I already had my own. After the vows, after the kiss, after the applause, Nora and I walked hand in hand back down the aisle. The mayor nodded at me from the side, gave me a firm pat on the shoulder, and said, "Go celebrate. You've earned it." We made reception. Reception where the energy was electric. Nora's dad gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying at the same time. Her mom hugged me 3 times before dinner even started. I shook hands with people I hadn't seen in years. One of my old instructors from aviation school had driven 2 hours to be there. He held up a glass and said, "You're a damn good mechanic, Evan. And today, you proved something a lot bigger than that." Throughout the night, I kept expecting my parents to approach, maybe say something, maybe just to look me in the eye. But they never came over. They stayed seated at their corner table, eating quietly, saying little. I stopped watching them. I didn't need to anymore. Instead, I focused on the people who were actually there for me. After dinner, I stood up to give a short speech. Nora had encouraged me to keep it simple, but something told me this was a moment I couldn't waste. That I stepped up to quietened. The room heated. I want to thank every single one of you for being here today, for showing up, for standing with us, for celebrating something real. I know weddings are supposed to be about love, and ours absolutely is. But today reminded me of something else. Today reminded me that you don't need permission to be proud of who you are. You don't need anyone to validate the life you chose. And if someone can't respect the road you took, that says more about them than it ever will about you. A pause. Then I added, for a long time, I let other people define what success looked like. I shrank myself to fit their definition, but not anymore. I'm proud of what I do. I'm proud of who I've become. And most of all, I'm proud to be standing next to someone who sees me for all of it. I looked at Nora, and the entire room clapped. The rest of the night blurred in the best way. Head and then Log laughed and cut the cake. At one point, I stepped outside for some air and found Mayor Holt leaning against a pillar, sipping sparkling water. He looked at me and said, "You know what I love about people like you?" I raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "You don't build things just to get applause. You build them because it's in your bones. That kind of person, there's no stopping him." I nodded. "Thank you for everything." He raised his glass. "To building your life on your own terms." That night, as Nora and I pulled away in the car with cans rattling behind us and friends cheering, I didn't look back once. I didn't need to. The people who mattered were moving forward with me. The next morning, the sun poured through the hotel room window. Nora was still asleep, her hand resting lightly on my chest, her hair draped across my shoulder. I stayed still for a long time, just listening to her breathing. My mind was still spinning from everything that had happened. I thought I'd feel anger, maybe regret, maybe a tight knot in my chest because of what my parents had done. But instead, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. It was the first morning in years that I woke up, not carrying the disappointment on my back. I wasn't trying to win them over anymore. I wasn't trying to be something ent. I washed me, a husband, a mechanic, a man who had walked into a room full of people and held his head high without permission. Later that afternoon, after we checked out and started heading to our new apartment, I got a text from my younger sister, Lila. It simply said, "Cat, come and you can. You're talking about what happened." I didn't respond right away. I sat with it. Nora saw the message and looked at me. "You are Yui?" I nodded. "Yeah, I'm good. I just need a minute." We pulled into the parking lot of our new place. It was small, but ours, the kind of home we built, not inherited. Nora carried in both inbox and box. I followed behind her, still holding my phone. I placed it on the counter and stared at it for a long moment. Then I picked it up and called. Lila answered on the first ring. "Evan," she said quickly, "I'm sorry for what they did. I really am." "I know," I said. "You've always been on my side. I just wanted you to know." Something changed. After the mayor made that announcement, they looked like they'd been slapped across the face. Dad was pale. Mom was holding her purse like it was a shield. I stayed quiet. He didn't say anything right away, but when they got home, Dad sat in the kitchen for hours. No TV, no newspaper, just sat there. Then he asked me to pull up the article about the airport project. He read the whole thing out loud. I think it finally hit him. I took a breath, unsure how to feel. Did he say anything? He said he didn't need us. That's it. Then he went upstairs. I leaned against the kitchen counter. That's probably the closest thing to a confession I'll get. "I don't think he's ready to say sorry," Lila said, "but I think he knows he was wrong." "I'm not waiting for him to say it," I replied. "I'm done asking for something he refuses to give." Lila's voice softened. "I'm proud of you. You were incredible yesterday." "Thanks," I said. "I finally feel like I'm not hiding anymore." We hung up. I looked around our new kitchen. Bare shelves, a few moving boxes, A single mug with Nora's lipstick on the rim. It felt like the beginning of something real. Nora walked in and leaned against the doorway. "Everything okay?" I smiled. "Yeah, I think I finally understand that being seen doesn't always mean being seen by everyone. Sometimes it just means being seen by the right people." She walked over and wrapped her arms around me. "You've always been seen. Now you just believe it." Later that week, an article came out in the local paper. It featured the city's new airport project and highlighted several contributors. My name was listed at the top of the engineering team. There was a photo of me standing next to May Holt. King straight into the camera that a copy of the paper was left in our mailbox by someone anonymous, but I had a pretty good idea who it was. A week after that, I got a letter. It wasn't from my father. It wasn't even in his handwriting. It was from my mother. She wrote, "Evan, I wish I had found the strength to stand beside you. I was scared, not of you, but of your father's disappointment. That was wrong, and I know it. You are not a failure. You never were. I saw you walk down that aisle with your head high, and I have never been more proud or more ashamed of myself at the same time. If you can find room in your heart, I'd like to rebuild something. No pressure, no expectations, just as your mom." I read the letter twice. Then I placed it in a drawer. Not out of anger, not out of rejection. I just knew that forgiveness would come in my time, not on their terms. That night, Nora and I walked down to the park near our place. Planes passed overhead as they approached the new airport. I looked up at them, knowing I had helped design the systems, guiding them safely in. "I used to think I had to change to earn their love," I said, "but I was never the one who needed to change." Nora took my hand. "You didn't earn their love. You outgrew their approval." The air was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels full instead of empty. I stood there watching the sky, thinking about how much time I had spent trying to be worthy in someone else's eyes, and it never occurred to me that I had already been worthy all along. But it's been 7 months since the wedding. The photo of Nora and me at the altar sits on our living room shelf. Her smile is wide. Mine looks calm, but when I look closer, I see something deeper. Release, peace, and depth. I don't remember what the weather was like that day. I don't remember what food we served, but I remember how it felt to finally stop waiting for someone else's pride and start standing in my own. That I still haven't spoken to my father. He hasn't called. I haven't reached out. That part of my life is quiet now. For a long time, I was afraid of silence. I thought silence meant rejection. Now I know it can mean freedom. My mother has written me twice. The letters have softened. She asked questions about the house, about the work being done, and at Nora. I write back. Not often, but enough to keep a door cracked open. She doesn't make excuses anymore. She doesn't ask for forgiveness. She just shows up on paper 1 page at a time. That I think that's all I ever really wanted. Someone to see me without asking me to change. Work has never been better. After the wedding, a few city officials contacted me about consulting on future projects. One of them even offered me a position overseeing long-term engineering contracts tied to transportation planning. I took it. I still get to work with machines, still get my hands dirty, but now I'm helping shape the systems that move this city forward. A few weeks ago, I walked through the terminal of the new airport for the first time since it opened. I stood near the control tower and watched a plane land smoothly on a runway I had helped redesign. No R&O recognized, no one clapped, but I stood there with my hands in my pockets and a quiet smile on my face. That moment wasn't for anyone else. It was mine. Nora stood next to me and whispered, "You made that happen." I nodded. We both did. Because she was part of this story, too. From the moment we met, she believed in my work, passion, vision. She never asked me to be more polished or more presentable. She just asked me to be honest. That kind of love doesn't beg for attention. It builds you from the inside out. Sometimes I still hear my father's voice in my head telling me I chose the wrong path. But that voice grows quieter every day. IT gets drowned out by the hum of jet engines, the sound of a new life being built one day at a time. What I learned is this. Pride from others is a gift, but pride in yourself is a necessity. When I stopped chasing his approval, I finally made room for my own. There's a pressure that comes from being told you're not enough. It creeps in slowly, disguises itself as motivation, and convinces you that your value is tied to someone else's expectations. It took me almost a decade to realize that the very thing my father resented, the grease under my nails, the hours I spent in hangars, the career I built from the ground up, was the same thing that gave me purpose. That I used to walk into rooms and shrink myself. I used to filter my words, smile politely, and downplay what I did. Now, when people ask what I do, I say it clearly. I'm an aircraft systems mechanic and infrastructure consultant. I help keep planes in the air and cities moving safely, and I love it. If you're reading this and you've ever been made to feel like your work, your passion, or your path is somehow lesser because it doesn't fit into someone else's mold, I want you to hear me clearly. Your worth isn't decided by titles or degrees. It isn't earned by being someone you're not. It's already inside you. The hard part is believing it, especially when the people closest to you refuse to. But you don't have to carry their disappointment forever. You get to decide when to set it down. You get to build a life that makes sense to you. You get to walk down your own aisle with your head up, knowing exactly who you are. That's what I did. And I wouldn't change a thing if this story meant something to you. If you've ever felt dismissed for choosing your own path, then you're not alone. Whether you work with your hands, your heart, or your voice, what you build with love has value. I shared this not for sympathy, but for connection. Because someone out there needs to hear that you are not a failure for choosing something different. You are not less for following your passion. And you never have to shrink for people who refuse to see your worth. Fire, thanks for listening. Sparkling hard if this story moved you. Share it with someone who needs it. Drop a comment with the part that hit you most. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories.